All right, just give me a thumbs up if you heard that. That would be pretty cool. All right, nice one. So here we go. I'm going to share my screen with you, and then we're going to dive into the session. So 2 seconds, guys. Sorry. Here we go. Everyone see my slides? Give me a thumbs up again. All right, we're good to go. Nice one. All right, well, yeah. So as I said, tonight we're talking about GA4. We're talking about the impact of GA4 specifically for SaaS companies, B2B SaaS. That's all we do here at Powered by Search, B2B SaaS. So it makes sense that we're going to talk about that. And here is what I'm going to cover off. Going to dive in. It's going to be about half an hour of slides, and then we can ask questions. Definitely pop them in the chat. I can still see your comments here, so so I'll answer any that come up as I go along if it fits, and otherwise we'll come to them at the end. We want to talk about 4 things tonight. I'm going to talk about the problem with universal analytics. If you don't know what universal analytics is already, this session is based for people who want to move to GA4. But if you are on universal analytics, that's cool, because that's basically the standard analytics that everybody has already. Then we're going to talk about why GA4 is systematically and structurally different to UA. We'll talk about the differences that matter for SaaS. We won't talk about all of the differences. We're only interested in SaaS here. And then we're going to talk about a roadmap for configuring GA4 for your SaaS. And I want to give you a heads up here. That roadmap is primarily based around strategic choices. There are some technical considerations too, obviously, but that is mostly strategic. So let's start off here with what's the problem with universal analytics. Now, you've probably been using universal analytics for a long time if you're a marketer, but the reality is most marketers just have no clue how to actually use that. And there's no judgment from me here. It's confusing. There's stuff everywhere. There are things that maybe don't make sense for your business. There's all sorts of problems with universal analytics. What you want to know is rarely what you actually find out, or what you're even able to find out. So maybe for you as a marketer in a SaaS company, what you want to know is like how much revenue is attributed to last click interactions with your Bofu landing page, right? But what you actually find out is landing page conversion numbers that are entirely divorced from free trial upgrades. Not very helpful if you're trying to make an argument for, hey, we need more budget because this kind of activity over here creates better downstream revenue. Maybe you want to know who are the paying users that are about to churn so that you can send them targeted ads. But actually what you end up with is these kind of like effectively meaningless audience metrics a lot of the time that tell you, hey, here's like how many people browsed on an Android device. So the scenario is that we end up with something like this, like there's a sea of information, but there is so little ability to actually understand what people are doing on your site and on your web properties in general. We can't answer questions right now like which demand gen activities produce high LTV customers, or at least it's technically incredibly hard. We can't talk about, you know, how do we understand which users are slipping away from the product, because we find that very hard to understand with just universal analytics. And then, you know, do we have a clear picture of the customer journey across the website and app? Nope. And then we're left with these conversations, right, where effectively it looks like something like this. The CMO or your marketing execs will say something like, what's generating revenue for the company? Why and how can we get more revenue? You're left going, hey, I'm just going to check the analytics. And then there's a silence because actually it's really, really hard to get that information from UA. And we end up showing charts that are not really revenue focused about bounce rates year on year. And like, there's nothing wrong with understanding bounce rate, but that's not how we get more budget to do better demand gen activities and ultimately to grow the company. So GA4 is a massive change. Now there's a massive change in the sense that we will be able to answer questions like that, but also it's systematically and just like really structurally different. the big difference really is that universal analytics was made in a time where people were moving to cross-device browsing for the first time ever. And that's pretty cool that it was made then. It got us to where we are today. It told us things like what happened during a user session on a site. And that's really, really what it's focused on, is session-based events. So like when somebody starts their session by loading your website, and then it goes all the way over to when they leave, right? Assuming you don't hit midnight and it just arbitrarily cuts your session off. Page views are treated differently to events. So a page view is a thing in universal analytics, but then you can define these events that are custom, right? That's very different now. And then it is so hard in universal analytics to measure activity across devices, but also across web properties in general. And we'll talk a little bit about that in a second. Fast forward to 2023 or 2022, really, we're much more interested in what Google Analytics can measure. And guys, I noticed a couple of people raising hands. Just put the questions that you have into the chat here, and I'll come back to those in a second, or any observations you have. What did this user do, for example, is a question that we want to answer. Like, what did, I don't know, Frank do when he loaded the site and then signed up for a trial? What did he do after that? We want to find that information out. And that's cool because in GA4, everything is an event, including page views. This changes the way that we can structure data and send data to Google Analytics. Cross-device tracking is now a core feature as well. And that is a big change again. So although universal analytics was meant to facilitate device, crossing over devices, it actually was quite hard to really make that happen in terms of data. So we end up with a scenario where, like, now we want to track things differently. So this is how buyers buy SaaS products. Somebody might start a trial, they might attend a webinar, they might log into a trial, go to a different webinar, read a bunch of different resources on your site, invite the team to a trial, and then they might, want to do an upgrade using self-serve options. Or alternatively, you've got this person on the right who reads one blog article, then there's a big gap, then a couple more blog articles, and then finally they might be ready to talk to sales after initiating a kind of a live chat scenario. That is a very different set of user journeys, and we have to think about how to actually measure those. GA4 allows you to do this in a way that universal analytics never could. You could never get the full story with universal analytics. And that is why it is actually, although scary to look at, an incredibly cool move forward. On that note, let's just take a look at some of the core differences between GA4 that matter for SaaS. I can really break down the four main themes here. So let's start with data streams. Every SaaS product is probably broken down into 2 or maybe 3 or maybe more properties, right? So you've got a financecrm.co I've labeled here as the kind of the marketing site, right? Where we go to find out the information about Finance CRM, a fake product. And then we can click sign up or start free trial or whatever it is, and we go into an app. So the app is usually hosted on a subdomain, app.financecrm.co. And then maybe we download an iOS app or an Android app. And in fact, user journeys in SaaS happen across multiple different properties, multiple different devices, and universal analytics could never do that. Google Analytics 4, that's like the thing that it does. This is baked in from start to finish to understand what is happening across different web properties. Now, don't confuse web properties with analytics properties here. Let me show you this. So The setup previously with Universal Analytics was that you would have effectively 3 web properties. So we've got, app.finance.crn.co, then the marketing site, and then the iOS app. Maybe you've got an Android app as well. You would have generally a UA property for each one of those under Universal Analytics. And then you would, if you had Universal Analytics 360, do a roll-up property, which would allow you to visualize the customer journey. Most people probably on this call didn't have Universal Analytics 360. So actually measuring the roll-up so that you could understand what was happening over the course of the user journey, like that wasn't possible. On the other hand, GA4 wants you to use data streams. And what it wants you to do with those is it wants you to plug all of the data into a single GA4 property. That's a huge shift. That's a huge, huge shift. So the reality of that is that now you have event level data from your app next to marketing website data. You've got the iOS data all in the same property. So when my fictional guy, Frank Zabaka, starts over in the marketing site, looks around, reads a couple of blogs, signs up for a free trial, goes over to the app, uses the app a couple of times, maybe downloads the iOS app and looks at the pricing, all of a sudden, like that's in one place versus Universal Analytics. That's a big deal. So that was data streams. It can give you a full picture of user activity on one GA4 property. The next level is event data and user data can easily accept custom parameters. Now, if you've used Segment and you've used like Mixpanel or Heap or Amplitude together, and you want to know like what are our users actually doing, you'll be familiar with understanding that you can pass custom parameters to every action, every event, every user. And you can build out really rich properties for people. So for example, let's just grab this guy here. This is a guy who is on the pro plan of our product, our SaaS product. And he was previously a basic user. He was free effectively. He's in an organization size of 250. We should probably address our pricing model. And then he is the admin of that company. He's been to 7 webinar seven webinar sessions, right? Those are each user parameters. He might take an action on our web app, which is to select a paid plan. That's an event. That event can have a series of parameters also, right? So you've got the plan that he's chosen. You've got the value of the plan that he's chosen in terms of numbers. Then you've got the currency, which Google Analytics always wants, by the way. And then you have a duration, which maybe you want to put in, because that's useful for us to understand later on. And maybe he does something on the actual marketing site as well, right? This kind of data where we can pass to every event that we want to send, we can pass certain parameters to Google Analytics so that we can build audiences, we can build custom segments, we can build funnels and reports based on this data for the first time ever. And that is super exciting. So that's a kind of a really big change here. And I mentioned segments and audiences. Again, for the first time ever, we're able to build like truly effective audiences in GA4. And that's exciting, right? So with Universal Analytics, you could build segments, you could build audiences based on some things. Now, the problem was that as effective as their functionality for audience building may have been, in Universal Analytics, you couldn't pass that event data. You couldn't pass those event and user parameters into analytics so that you could build actually effective audiences. So, okay, let's say we wanted to find out users who were slipping away. So slipping away being maybe they haven't logged in for 34 days, let's say. Now, you wouldn't really be able to build an audience around those before, because a login event wouldn't have been able to be as rich as you can now make it in GA4. And in any case, most people's paradigm, like their understanding of what analytics could do, was not the same that it will be with GA4. Also in GA4, we have predictive audiences. That one, likely to purchase, that's a predictive audience. So Google Analytics 4 can take user event activity, and they can, it can basically go, okay, well, based on this person doing X and Y event, there are some technical constraints, by the way, it will build an audience of people who are likely to purchase, which is pretty cool when you think about it. There are a couple of these that Google Analytics 4 will accept and create for you if you ask it to, and it's baked into the plan. Pretty cool. So the final thing is, and I know that Universal Analytics also had this functionality sort of hidden away, but I think that this is really important to highlight. Site search functionality in Google Analytics 4 is like pretty much baked in, because one of the default events that GA4 will actually measure is the site search query that that your user has typed in. So like, let's say I go to poweredbysearch.com/blog, it's a plug, and I type in there in the search box GA4. Well, now I will be sending a parameter effectively with my event, because we're using WordPress to power our blog, which GA4 will pick up by default and include in reports. Previously, there was some configuration necessary to get this, but the reality is this will help you understand what people are searching for on your site that they're not able to find. Two benefits to that. The first one is that you're able to create content that you may not have discovered with Search Console. And then the second one is that Sid has just pointed this out in the chat. Site search is a secret weapon to know what's working and what's not working on the website. Sid, fully agree. Effectively, if I find that a huge number of people are searching for landing page or case studies on my website, maybe the information that I think is obvious is not actually as obvious as I think, and I need to look into that. So that is effectively the core differences. I'm just going to stop briefly, and Matt Dykman asks, do you think these predictive audiences could be misled by existing users if this is a net new GA4 instance? It's very interesting. Right now, I think a lot of this functionality is kind of, we're not 100% how GA4 is actually going to perform, I will say, because it is so new in the kind of iteration that it is, and it's changing so fast. I think we're going to have to do some testing there and kind of see how things go with it. But regardless, even if you didn't use those predictive audiences, you could set up your own audiences based on rich event data. And I think that's really something that you should think about as well. There's maybe a compare and contrast level there. So Trenton says you could see what people were searching for with UA. You absolutely could, but it's way more intuitive in GA4 for most people. Okay, so we're going to talk about a roadmap for configuring GA4 for your SaaS. I hope you got your pens ready. I will share these slides at the end of the session, by the way. But what we want to do here is walk through our process for thinking through what is necessary for GA4 for your SaaS. Let's just put these dates out there. You probably got these dates in your diary already, but reality is you need to set up a GA4 property now. You can wait till after the session in reality, but and you need to set that up through dual tagging first of all, and integrate your data as fast as possible. I'll talk about this in a second, but effectively GA4, obviously, if we want to make year-on-year comparisons, we need to get as much data into it as we can right now, so that by July 1st, 22, we have everything in there that we need to go in there, because after 1 year later, we're not going to be able to query the data in Universal Analytics, any new data, sorry. So we won't be able to make year-on-year comparisons. Probably everyone that you've spoken to has pointed this out. It is important. You do need to do something about it. I'm going to show you that it's actually fairly easy. We're not going to look at the actual UI here, just a heads up, because every analytics instance is actually very different now. But what I am going to do here is I'm going to walk you through the principles that you actually need to make this a success for yourself, rather than just a technical implementation. First stage is do now. So we've got 3 stages: do now, do next, and do later. So the do now here is you need to get all of your data into the product as soon as possible, given the tight timeline. So firstly, set up a dual tag. So dual tagging means that you're sending data to GA4 and Universal Analytics in parallel. So you continue to use UA probably for a little while. My recommendation to you is do this with Tag Manager. It is so much easier. If you've, up until this point, I've spoken to a bunch of marketers who hate Tag Manager. I previously hated it too. It is useful. And at the end of the day, whatever is the path of least resistance is probably what you should dive into. Everything in GA4 is easier with Tag Manager than just using their native UI. So just a heads up there. Google actually offers you a guided setup through your UA property as well. That will get you the kind of the basic setup done. From there, you need to add those data streams. So you've got your app, you've got your marketing site, you've got your maybe multiple mobile apps, depends what your business actually does. Set up a data stream for as many of those as you think is relevant to measure your users' activity. Add those data streams directly in GA4's admin panel. It's actually relatively easy. One thing to note is it is not enough to create one. Every one of those data streams has a different measurement ID, is what I'm going to say here. You need to make sure that you've got the right one installed on each thing. Don't just use the same snippet. So that measurement ID is actually on the on Google Analytics itself, so you can get that every time. Turn on the default events just for the moment. If you want to turn them off later, you can. Turn on the default events that Google Analytics has. There's a whole bunch of them. There's a list. I'm not going to go through it because it's pointless when you could just literally Google that default list of events for GA4. But they cover things like page view. They cover things like user engagement. They cover things like scroll. And so it's really interesting for you to be able to use the debugger view to actually see how event level data works in Google Analytics 4. The next thing is to integrate Google Search Console. So I'm just going to say this: you need edit privileges for basically everything in GA4. So whether it's your Google Search Console instance, or whether it's your Google Ads account, you need edit privileges. You also need edit privileges to really do anything in GA4. It is a bit frustrating until you realize that. And their advice to use the demo store and kind of the demo data is actually pretty frustrating, because it's hard because you don't have edit privileges to actually set anything up there. So definitely think about that. Integrating Google Ads. If you want to use GA4 audiences and remarketing, you need to toggle enable personalized advertising in the setup process. And by the way, that's up to you. There's a lot of data questions that you need to think about in GA4. Obviously, Google is not known for its data privacy. So definitely have a little think through that in terms of what you want to take out of Google Ads and put into search. GA4's retention window for user level data is only 14 months, right? So actually with GA4 in general, data retention is not amazing. And if you don't find a way to get that data out, it is going to disappear. Now, BigQuery is what Google is currently pushing. It offers a way to save old analytics data, effectively sync it. It isn't free, but there is a sandbox limit to get you started while you work it out. I will say this though about BigQuery. It is complicated, and I wouldn't want for anyone to look at it and go, that is way too complicated to set up. And therefore I'm not going to bother with GA4 and go off and find a different analytics solution. Google Analytics, I think, is still the best analytics tool available, especially for SaaS now. So configure retention, look back, and attribution model. So as I've mentioned to you, the default retention period for GA is 2 months. You can set it to 14. Don't leave it as 2 months, please. You will lose so much insight. In UA, the look back window is 6 months. So that's for UA, sorry, the look back window being how long it measures conversions through, right? So in GA4, it is only 90 days. Again, the default attribution model for GA4 is data-driven. And to be honest, that's probably fine for you, but you can change the attribution model if you like. Most people, I think, would be more than happy in SaaS just to use a data-driven model, although clearly data-driven is a attribution model which is primarily focused on improving the ROI on paid ads. So definitely keep that in mind. So after you've done that kind of initial setup, and by the way, that setup, that might not take you that long, but it is really, really important to do as soon as possible. After you've done that, you want to focus on setting up the correct events for your SaaS. We're going to go through this in a second, but basically stop, right? This is the moment where you start building analysis paralysis into your day-to-day life if you don't consider what you want to measure. Think about what you need to know before you go any further. Here's 3 people in the organization. They've all got different personas. They all have different needs. The head of growth might want to know what are the main drop-offs in our funnel. The VP of demand gen might want to know how much are we spending on paid media, or ultimately what's the ROI on that paid media in terms of free trial starts. The director of SEO might want to know how many MQLs did they generate through their work, or which blog posts drove the most traffic. Those are different things that you need to know. How I like to think about this is in terms of things that I might want to know on a regular basis, an ad hoc basis, so from time to time, or that might help my team, or that might help other stakeholders. So on a regular basis, things that I want to know, and I'm not saying you're going to be able to get everything here from GA4, but these are the kinds of data points that you want to be sending at least. How many leads came through search? I want to know that regularly. On an ad hoc basis, I want to know, like, what was the conversion rate trend over time? Did it go up? Did it go down? Where were the bumps? Things that might help my team, like what are the gaps in my marketing that need filling? Because then I can help the team, I can get the team to help resource those things. And then things that might help other stakeholders. So for example, how much revenue is attributable to paid media versus what we invested? It's an ROI question. That is so important. So understanding those things and knowing what I want to find out is going to help me set this up correctly later. Again, just pop any questions that you have into the chat. I'm going to come and stop for a second before we move on before too long. So just pop your questions in and I'll grab those. Here's a couple of things that you might also think about. So break down your funnel or your user journey into these categories. So I like to think about most things in SaaS in this way. You may have heard this called Pirate metrics acronym. Acquisition, activation, revenue, retention, and referral. Different events happen here at each one of those stages. So for example, at acquisition, what I might want to know is, I want to know when someone signs up for a demo, Or I might want to know when they viewed a key landing page. Activation, I might want to know when somebody completes the first main item in my kind of onboarding sequence. So like, did they create an invoice, for example? Revenue wise, I might want to know what plans were viewed, what chosen by which people who viewed which plans, right? Or at least the audience, the general audience kind of viewed those things. And then retention wise, I might want to know about daily active users after 90 days. Did someone log in? Working out what I need to know now is going to help me structure the data that allows me to move forward. Here is what I mean by structuring data. So let's say at the revenue stage, I've got an event set up and I'm sending that event to Google Analytics 4. We're calling this chose paid plan. What I might want to know about that event is things like the plan type that a person is on, the duration, the value, the currency that they paid in or chose to pay in, and the previous plan that they were on in case this is, revenue that is expansion revenue or ultimately contraction revenue. Going through this this process and saying, okay, sign up for demo. Well, what do I want to know about that? What would be some kind of attributes here that I could measure about that? Going through that and saying, these are the things that I want to know. I recommend doing it in a bullet point, by the way, bullet point list. For each event that you create in your bullet point, think about what you might want to query by in that. Then you can take that and you can set up those events in Google Analytics. Now, again, I recommend doing this through Tag Manager personally. I think it's a much better experience than the default UI in GA4 for setting up events. But if you really want to, you can do it in GA4. You will lose some of the kind of the interactivity there, though. So set up events by doing these things. So like generate lead, that is the event itself. That triggers on a certain thing, maybe a page view with a specific path in it. The lead magnet, that might be an event in, that might be a property on the event itself. And then the user ID, user IDs and event, user parameters and event parameters are separated in GA4. So definitely think about what you might want to know from each one of those. So Tyler here has asked a question in the chat. What's the best way to exclude customer sessions in GA4? So example, people that just land on the homepage and log in straight away. This sort of data really muddies up our data. Tyler, you could have an audience that was based specifically around your customers. So either it is someone with the attribute customer on their user, or you could have something like people who, so in your specific example there's a session length on a landing page before they view like app.exampleco.com, that kind of thing. Sid, can we say GTM becomes redundant for creating event tracking on the website? I'm not 100% what you mean by that, to be honest. Definitely pop in what you mean and we can come back and clarify that. While we're talking about events, don't forget to register custom dimensions and metrics in GA4 themselves. So you have to set this stuff up if you want to see it in your reports. Every one of these custom dimensions that you actually create, so for example, lead magnet, it has to be set up. User ID, you have to set up all of these things in particular. So you won't be able to query or build reports around them until you do. The other thing is these, every event, everything that you set up manually in GA4 as an event or a parameter, it may take up to 24 hours before you're actually able to build reports around it. It's so annoying, but now that you know it, at least you won't fall into the same trap of punching your screen as I did. The next thing that you want to do is you want to set up audiences. Again, there's so much stuff that you could do. And GA4 allows you to set up 100 audiences at the moment. The numbers, by the way, are changing quite frequently. Even their docs are out of control. Well, it's no surprise there, really, for people who've been around Google for a little while. So what I recommend is thinking about what you might want to segment by each stage of the funnel. So I've done 4 of them here. So like, for example, acquisition, fans. And by the way, I always recommend people have a standardized naming convention when thinking about this stuff, because it makes managing accounts so much easier, and it makes it so much clearer for the rest of your marketing team if they didn't set up the thing in the first place. Acquisition fans might be people who view 5 blog posts in like a 30-day period or something. You can measure free signups. So that would be people who created an account and have the user parameter of account type free. You could measure an activation. So set up audiences around they were signed up, but they didn't activate. So they didn't do X number of actual valuable events that would actually mean that they were activated. That's a really big one for SaaS. And if you've only been on demand gen before, it's worth thinking about these down past the kind of acquisition phase audiences and events. Really take some time around this. The upshot here is that by the point where you have you've sat down and you've set up your document, like just a blank document that says basically, here's what we want to know, here's who we want to know it about, you will have a pretty good concept of what you're actually measuring here. If you don't do this, you will end up with that thing that I described earlier, analysis paralysis. You'll have no real way of answering any of the questions that you actually care about. And that will be an absolute pain for you. So after we've set up the correct events for our SaaS, because we've got all the data in the product, we're able to do that now. We want to build reports that we'll use to measure marketing impact. Now, there are 3 really main kinds of report in GA4. So you've got the default reports. Those are literally what you load it up, you've got them, they're right there. They don't mean a huge amount to you at first, probably. The reality is GA4 is hugely configurable, and you can basically customize pretty much anything that you see. But the default reports stay, I've got to say, pretty useless. But if you just want to know things like which pages generated most leads on first click, like you can use default reports to do that kind of thing. Then, let's say you wanted to work out what are the biggest growth levers for us. You could build a free-form analysis around that. So in GA4, we're given this this analysis hub, they call it, for a little while. But basically, you can build very flexible reports around a number of different kind of either predefined or ultimately you can start from scratch report types. The freeform is my personal favorite, despite the fact that I love a funnel visualization. Freeform allows you to it's effectively a really marketing-based pivot table. You can query by those user event parameters that you've sent in. You can query all sorts of things around it, and you can build really good free-form reports. When you do that as well, you can click on the individual data points within that, and you can often bring custom reports out from your own custom report. You really should spend a little bit of time playing with that once you've got your data in place. It isn't straightforward, but when you've got a hang of it, it's pretty beautiful. Then for the first time ever, in my opinion, funnels are actually useful in Google Analytics. The funnel analysis tool is so good. It allows you to add in custom events, page views. It allows you to do linear and non-linear funnels. It allows you to dive into really specific stages of the funnel. You can build audiences from the funnels. It is brilliant. I think there's going to be a lot of great opportunities here for SaaS businesses. And in fact, many people will be able to actually understand the user journey for the first time. It is amazing how many people have no idea really what their users actually do once they fill in the lead gen form. The other thing you can do is you can customize everything to make this data useful to you. So for example, this button down here, I don't know if you can see my cursor, but it says library. If you click on that thing, you can drag and publish and unpublish anything that you see in the sidebar. You can rename a bunch of stuff. What I will say to you though is that building these reports, the most meaningful reports that you're going to get will come from the custom reports that you build versus what is there by default. So yeah, that is a kind of a summary. So my advice to you from here, take the time to get all of your data into the product as soon as possible. Step back, work out what you want to measure, who you want to know it about, and how you are going to actually build those reports in GA4, and then think and go, okay, I'm going to put all this into action. I'm going to have my engineers or my marketing ops people or whatever it is. If you're going to do it yourself, that's fine as well, or your agency. And then go and have them build the reports that you'll use to actually measure the impact of your marketing. So guys, that we're at the end there of the presentation. I want to know what your biggest takeaway from this session is. And I'm also going to come to any questions that we have here. I'm going to stop sharing. So don't forget to put your questions there if you have any in the chat or observations that you may have had. Anonymous attendee. So how would you recommend using a product analytics solution like Mixpanel, Heap, Amplitude, or even a customer success solution next to GA4? Where does GA4 shine, and where is it better to rely on a real product analytics solution? Well, first things first, I absolutely love Amplitude myself. I like it. I've used it. I've measured a lot of stuff in the past with it. It is still a superior product in terms of measuring the analytics once you get past the product, the sign up, right? It is made for that, so it's obviously going to be the best. On the other hand, GA4 is now brilliant at measuring the whole customer journey. And I think that's really where this shines through. So whereas Heap, Mixpanel, Amplitude, those guys are building a product that is primarily made for product people. Although at the end of the day, you can also use it for some of your marketing activity. It is not going to be the same as measuring your marketing ROI with Google Analytics. Some specifics, those things you will never be able to integrate audiences that you've set up in Google Analytics 4 with if you set up a segment in Amplitude or Mixpanel, you won't be able to send those to Google Analytics, to Google Ads. That's a big deal because these audiences will continue to stand in Google Analytics 4, and you'll be able to target people with retargeting or remarketing campaigns based on activity that you've already defined in Analytics. The possibilities of that feature alone for people who are investing in paid media, it's absolutely huge. Like, you're no longer talking about kind of wangling Google Ads to do what you want it to. It's built in by default. Andrea, biggest takeaway is that I need to get my stuff together. I feel you. This was not a pleasant learning curve, personally. I quite enjoy analytics, weirdly, but I think there are painful lessons to be learned while you're doing this. I would recommend on that basis you get onto it as quickly as you can. All right, we got one more here. Guys, if you have more questions, pop them in. Also, by the way, as we've got a little bit of time, I believe, if you want to have any questions about your B2B SaaS marketing in general answered, I'd be happy to help there. Brilliant presentation. Thanks, Vivi. How do you segment by a particular channel, landing page, and conversion rate and revenue? I assume you don't want all of them together, first of all. So if you do, that's going to take a little bit of effort for you. But, you know, reality is Google Analytics 4 is configurable. I even saw an example of somebody tracking their dog's location with GPS in GA4. It is that configurable. But to answer your question, how do you segment by a particular channel, landing page, conversion rate? You can do that in pretty much the same way that you can in UA. Again, the reality is, if you want to know information, send rich information to GA4 using event parameters, user parameters. This kind of information and setting up now will help you in the future. You can't build kind of recursive reports for event data that isn't there for you right now. So that's really important to know. How do you segment specifically? You'd build up an audience. So you can build an audience based around pretty much any event, any parameter, anything in GA4. It's way more flexible in that sense. Again, I know I keep saying it's way more flexible, but one of the reasons this is so sort of crippling for marketers is that there's nothing really set up in the way that UA wanted to be opinionated about what you saw. You can really do anything that you want with this. Is it best to migrate to GA4 and forego UA? That's a question. I'm looking at all the pros and cons. Well, you don't have to. If you've never set up UA before, you may as well set this up as well. There's nothing stopping you from doing that. You're only going to get a year's data before it goes away. But at the end of the day, GA4 is a product that is in development. Like, they are still releasing features, they're changing features all the time. There's actually a really helpful change log that they're publishing. If you kind of Google GA4 change log product updates, you'll see those. There's a heap of stuff that is there already. There's a heap of stuff that they're working on. And then you can set up the dual tag as we described earlier. So basically, you're tagging events in UA, you're tagging sessions in UA, you're tagging events in GA4. You do that through Google Tag Manager. You can have two implementations of the code snippet on the same site. At the end of the day, you also can't measure app activity in the same property on a Universal Analytics account. So it is really important that you at least, if you're thinking about SaaS analytics, you think, okay, I've got multiple separate data streams. I should also be sending data to GA4. Growth. Any suggestions on importing external data into GA4 so that we can know the real monetary value of the customers? It's probably a question more than anything, Grotham, for your product team or for your, engineers, or I don't know what kind of company you're in, but the kind of the best thing that you can do here is structure the data so that your user data, for example, has the plan ID that they're on, and it maybe has the time that they subscribed to it on there as well. That would allow you to at least calculate some things in GA4. So for example, you could send the subscription change date if you wanted to. You do have to be careful with all of these custom event parameters though, because there is a limit on the number that you can send. I have just forgotten that number off the top of my head, but it is easy to Google again, as I have been doing every time I've needed to use it. You would then send that event level data, which says basically this user level data, which says there's the subscribe date, and there's the plan type, and there's the plan value and currency. And you could build custom audiences based around that, I think. Guys, I'm going to give you one more minute here to put in any additional questions, and then we're going to call this a day. Anyone got anything that they want to answer? What's the best way to track what users do after they trigger a conversion event in GA4? Well, Tyler, the good news is you can measure your events, basically whether they're conversion events or not. You can say, okay, well, look, let's think of a practical example. Chose a paid plan and then viewed paid plan successful, right? What would you do? So you could build an audience, again, specifically around people who did those events right next to each other. You could also build a funnel report in analytics based on them triggering those two events. And because events can be page views, unlike previously where you were building these weird funnels where you had to sort of like guess the funnel path a lot of the time for SaaS, you no longer have to do that in GA4. It is just, honestly, if you've ever worked in growth as well as marketing, GA4 should feel totally like natural to you. If it hasn't, like, you're going to skill up so much because this is a great opportunity to learn what those kind of funnel based things can do for you as well. So you can build, to answer your question very succinctly, Tyler, you can build a funnel report, a funnel analysis, which basically says they triggered that event and then they triggered that event. And you can work backwards from there. All right. Any more questions? No? Guys, thanks so much for coming tonight. We'll be back with another masterclass next month. Pretty soon, we've got Gia Laudi coming up, talking about customer-led growth. That'll be great, so keep an eye on that as well. And then the other thing is, if you want help setting up your Google Analytics for properties, definitely check out our website. We have a service right now where we are helping people do that. So go to poweredbysearch.com and you'll be able to find the link there. I'll put it in the slides as well so that we all have a link that we can click. Guys, thank you so much for coming. I'm looking forward to catching up with you on future masterclasses. Follow me on Twitter, obviously. I am Mark Thomas. I'm tweeting regularly about Google Analytics 4. Thanks, everyone. Bye.